we have a tendency to look for salvation or liberation through the agency of others, through some sort of external agency. And that's a bit of an exaggeration. It's not just a small tendency, it's a very, very big tendency. And the thing about that is, it's impossible. How can we get salvation or liberation or whatever we want to call it through the agency of others? Or instead of using those words, which are a bit loaded, we could just talk about growth. How can we grow as human beings? Through the agency of others. It has to be through the agency of us, obviously, even though that isn't, strictly speaking, an agency. We could also look at the other way and say, well, there's all these agencies, all these systems that hoodwink us and bamboozle us and browbeat us and frighten us so that we think that we have to go through them. The church is a very good example of this. In fact, we could say, just to make it a bit more concrete, that going back to the TATT religion or sect or whatever you call them, that the difference between them and the Orthodox, the Catholic Church, the church which was the only church at the time, you don't even need to call it the Catholic Church, it was just the church. The difference was that the Cathars would have implicitly held the position that our salvation, or whatever you want to call it, is something that has to be worked out without an intermediary. So it's like, I have to work that out between me and God. I can't go via a middleman. Of course, the word God is a bit problematic, so I'm using God here in a kind of more metaphorical sense. I don't mean literal God any more than if I was to bring in Satan, which we could always bring in Satan. We probably will. I probably will bring in Satan, but at some point or other in the discussion. But any more than I would mean literally Satan, the fellow with the red fellow with the horns and all that. Now, the reason you can't, it really doesn't make sense to talk about God in a literal sense, because anything literal, anything at all, doesn't matter whether it's God or whatever the hell it is, could be a teapot or it could be a plastic duck. Anything literal just means that it's a thought. It's a mental object. It's a thought-created object. That's what literal means. So when we say, well, it's literally this, what we mean is my thinking mind. This is what the thinking mind says it is, because the thinking mind is literal. It is the literal agency, super literal. Sometimes we might say that thinking is black and white. That's just another way. Yes or no, is it or isn't it? Come on, what is it? That's thought, that's literal, that's black and white, that's categories, that's boundaries. So nothing real is literal. And as Krishnamurti says, if we go around venerating or worshipping a literal conception of the divine, we're worshipping the mind, we're worshipping thought, because the literal representation of God or of the divine is a mental construct. Therefore, we are worshipping a mental construct, which is thought. All mental constructs come down to the same thing, whether it's God or whether it's a teapot or whether it's a plastic duck or whether it is anything at all. They're all of a kind. They're all mental constructs. Doesn't matter. The thing is, it's kind of as if we think they're all different and there's a great diversity there, but there isn't. They're just mental constructs. They're just thoughts. All thoughts are the same. They're totally bland, totally without flavour. They're only thoughts, but we project something on them that makes us think they are something, but they aren't. They're just thoughts. So I don't mean God in a literal sense, but that's basically the thing, that the guitars didn't see the need for an intermediary. The church at the time did see a need for an intermediary. They insisted upon the need for an intermediary. They insisted that they be that intermediary, so kind of a bit of self-interest going on there. Furthermore, the religious teachings or doctrines or texts that the church permitted were those that could be interpreted in terms of saying you have to go via a middleman, via someone else. And in fact, it's possible to interpret what Jesus says in two ways. In terms of, if you want salvation, you have to come through me, which is the normal Christian definition. So in that sense, Jesus is the intermediary. But then if you look at the other Gospels that have been gotten rid of by the church and thrown away by the church or burned by the church, obviously they weren't all burned, otherwise you wouldn't know about them, but some of them were preserved. And the message seems to be that Jesus isn't saying be like me or do as I do, in the sense copy me or go through me as an intermediary. He is saying that we all have that same connection that he does. So really, it's not as if we're being asked to throw away our individuality and lose all our faith in ourselves and go via a middleman who supposedly has the authentication to do the job for us, but that we trust ourselves, just as Jesus trusted himself. So in other words, it's not a disempowering thing. And like, instead of saying, well, do as I do, it doesn't mean copy me. It means be a true individual as I am being a true individual. That doesn't mean copying, obviously, but the whole point of me waffling on like this is to say that that's been distorted to disempower us and to empower the agency. But then again, on the other hand, we really do want to have an agency. So it's, we can't really go saying it's the church's fault or it's the agency's fault, because we don't trust ourselves and we want the security of having some completely unquestionable external power that can be guaranteed to help us out, because we don't trust ourselves. It's a fundamental human situation. We don't trust ourselves, so we trust others. And so when there's a lot of people, no one trusts themselves, everyone trusts others, so you get this thing called society, which isn't a person. It's just that result of no one actually trusting their own self. So we all become heteronymous instead of autonomous. We're all desperately copying each other and being afraid to be original, the fear of being the true original, which every single person is. So then, the point of all this, I was going to come to mental health. So in mental health, we could talk about salvation and liberation and growth. And we want to do it through an agency, experts, in other words. And on the one hand, we could say these agencies come in and they kind of hoodwink us into thinking we need them and whatever bullshit it is that they're, peddling. But we want those experts because we don't trust ourselves. So they're there because we want them. But this is a very curious thing, because mental health could be defined as being that state of being autonomous, not listening to what other people say or tell us, which is very, very good advice, not to listen or trust what other people are saying. What's the point of being born if you're just going to go on what a bunch of other people tell you or say And they themselves only say that because they've trusted someone else who's told them what to say or what to believe. That's not going to end in a good way at all. So, default situation for human beings, heteronomy. Don't take responsibility, trust some external agency or system in the desperate hope that we've made the right choice so that it'll work out, which it never does. And this creates a huge problem because when we come into mental health services, we automatically become, we hand everything over to the experts. We automatically become heteronymous. And we go along with whatever systems are put in place for us or that we're told about, whatever methods we're given, whatever approaches. Now, it sounds great to go in and be say, here we are, we've got this approach, that approach, we're going to use this model and we're going to use this therapy. It sounds great. And almost everyone believes in this because it sounds reasonable. It's the generic approach. Here's the generic way of becoming mentally healthy. But there is no generic way to become mentally healthy because mental health or autonomy is not a generic kind of a thing. Only us can do it without listening to other people at the end. So here's me and here's whatever I'm relating to, life, whatever existence. And there is some kind of there's no way to farm out the responsibility for that. It's between me and existence. It's between me and reality. It's between me and God. I can't shirk that. I can't shake it off. There's no shortcuts. There's no methods. There's no people telling me how to be autonomous. You can't really tell someone how to be autonomous, really, obviously enough. So this is a very, very tricky thing because at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day and every other part of the day, we're on our own, and our relationship is with our existence as it happens to be. And it really doesn't help to be afraid to have that encounter or that individual engagement. That doesn't mean that we don't get things wrong, but even if I do get things wrong, I'm getting them autonomously wrong. I'm making my own mistakes, and I will learn from those mistakes instead of making someone else's mistake. If you're making a mistake that's belonging to someone else, they're not going to admit it's a mistake, and you're going to be frightened to admit that it's a mistake because that throws you back on yourself again. If I realise that the entire mental health industry is bogus, then that's frightening because that throws me back on myself. Can't look for help anywhere else. But yet, absolutely, if mental health is a state of autonomy, there ain't nobody can help me. People can be kind, they can be supportive, they can be human, and that is very, very, that counts for a hell of a lot. But that's not the same thing as being technically helped, being told anything from the thinking mind that this is good, this is bad, this is what you should do, all of that stuff is disempowering, all of that stuff is garbage. All of that stuff is buying into the agency. So how much literature is there on this idea that mental health is achieved through an honest, non-mediated relationship with reality, where we figure it out all for ourselves, even though that's not the best phrase because it implies some sort of cognitive process, and there's no cognitive process. It's more like squaring off with something and seeing it. Seeing it as you see it, not as someone else tells you to see it. So really you're squaring off with reality and you're encountering it. This definitely doesn't involve figuring out in the normal sense, because figuring out in the normal sense means thinking about it, and thought is an agency. Thought is the quintessential agency. So we can go back to the Cathars and talk about the church as being an agency. That's just another manifestation of thought, of the system of thought. We can talk about the mental health industries, the professions, the whole agency that is out there. That's thought as well. It's all thought appearing in various guises. And even within this realm of mental health and how we're working in that realm, it is often the case, it's always the case, that a certain amount of people will want to look more deeply into it and be very dissatisfied with the generic official approach, which is only right. You're right to be suspicious of the generic official approach, because it's bogus. It's only there to give us a sense of security, but it's a false sense of security, so that's not so good, really, because a false sense of security just means extra pain when it lets you down, extra disempowerment. So when it does let you down, you're so disempowered, you can't function. If we were empowered and something let us down, that would be no problem, because we weren't depending on it anyway. So it's creating a dependency and then destroying that dependency, or finding out that dependency just goes to a bad place. It doesn't do anything at all. So it's interesting to think how to what degree do we talk about this? To what degree is this a point of discussion, that we talk about autonomy and what autonomy really means, and the contradictions that this throws up? And I don't think there's much discussion about it at all. Any more than there is a discussion within the world of Orthodox believers of how we would be better off working it out between ourselves and the divine, without any of the trappings of the organization of church, without any priests, without any of that crap. You don't get much discussion like that. It doesn't tend to occur. It doesn't grow. It's not fertile ground for such discussion. And neither in the world of mental health is this very, very healthy doubt of professionals and methods. But as I was kind of in a very roundabout way coming to say, even when people doubt the official version and try and come up with some other version, it doesn't matter, because that's still thought. So there's Satan for you again, in a metaphorical term. Satan's real clever, and he can encourage you to identify something as being Satan. Say, look, that's Satan over there. Let's go get him. Let's go and burn him. Let's go and take action against him, as a way of distracting, because that's what Satan does. He always displaces. So that when we think, yeah, the official version's wrong, maybe this approach will work. How can it? That's Satan too. That's thought too. That is a system of abstract relationships between non-existent things that we made up. It's not the real world at all. With the real world, thinking doesn't help. Making abstract representations does not help at all. All we can do is just to relate to it as it is, which is hugely demanding. So to relate to reality as it is ultimately demanding, because it takes every bit of us, every fibre of us. But all we have to do is relate. We don't have to do anything else. It's like, can I find the courage within myself to have this relationship? Or I guess it is a relationship, have this relationship with the fact of my existence, without anyone else butting in to tell me anything about it. Do I have the courage to do that? And if I do, it's not that I have to know the right way. There is no right way. It's just that I have to have the courage to have that encounter with reality, which necessitates dropping all ideas, all approaches, all conceptions, even and especially the conception of who I am. And generally speaking, in the general run of things, dropping the conception of who I am as part of my honest relationship with what it means to actually be here, be a person, or whatever it is we are. And that's too high a price to pay. The price of admission is your mind, your way of making sense of the world, your way of making the world comfortable and familiar, and having some sort of purchase on it. That's the price. As Hermann Hesse says in Steppenwolf. Not that I've read the book, but I've seen a few quotes from it. Or you could also say, instead of saying the price of admission to the Magic Theatre is your mind, you just have to lose your mind. You could say it's you, because your mind is you. You are your mind. It's your conception of yourself that you have. That's what you have to pay. That's the price of admission. And admission to the Magic Theatre is just another way of talking about having an authentic, autonomous relationship with this mysterious business of actually existing. Okay, thanks for watching.